There we go. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, lovely people. I'm super excited to have Dylan Sessler with me today for another Up Spiral Grief interview. And I will hand over the stage to you for a minute. Dylan, can you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Absolutely. My name's Dylan Sessler. I feel like I'm a normal guy, but apparently I've made big impacts over the last 2 years. So I started talking about suicide, mental health, trauma on TikTok in 2020, and it was really a conversation that I had never really talked openly about until 2020, just because I felt like it didn't really matter to anyone else; it just mattered to me. But I have a deep kind of history with suicide specifically, but trauma and mental health issues as well. I lost my dad to suicide at 6 years old, and then I nearly ended my life in 2020 or 2015, which when I was 25.
Yeah.
And I felt for those 20 years between those two situations, I just didn't talk about it. And so in 2020, I kind of wanted to change that, and TikTok kind of found me. I found TikTok. I don't know what you want to call that, but I started talking about it. Started talking about what happened to my dad, what happened to me, what I've, talked about with other people. And it led me to a point where I now have 580,000 followers on TikTok. I have a book. I have a whole coaching program. And I get to have conversations, with people, like yourself, every day and dig into topics that are uncomfortable and taboo and, really hard for people to dig into. So that's me in a nutshell. There's so much more outside of just what I do there, but that's basically who I am.
That's so incredible. Thank you so much for such a wrap-up introduction. It's perfect. I love what you said. I want to highlight a couple of things that you said. First of all, you never talked about it. And I think that's the biggest issue right there, that so many people do not talk about what's going on behind the scenes. I had lots of conversations with my sons, after what happened in our lives, to that whole idea of talking about it. I'm so grateful that you're here to talk about it, the not talking about it. It is so important, that we put it on the table, that we put it out there. And then, you're over 500,000 followers on TikTok by now, in a very short amount of time, just being that normal guy. I really love that, because this is how I feel too, despite what we have created here. I'm just a normal woman here, and I'm just really happy that I have conversations with people like you who've started like literally from, hey, we just need to talk about this. No idea where this will go, no idea what will turn this into, and look at you now. I just really love that. If you don't mind, Dylan, I'd really love to delve in a little bit deeper into your childhood, if that's okay. I ask permission to ask you whatever questions.
Absolutely.
Conversations are so important. Can you share a little bit with our audience here how your memories as a 6-year-old, when your dad took his own life? Did you see your dad differently to others? Did you see anything coming at the age of 6, or was it just complete shock and surprise to you? Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, it obviously was shock and surprise, but it felt, I still remember the morning when I came downstairs. It was August 12th. I remember coming downstairs as a little 6-year-old and just feeling like something wasn't right.
Yeah.
So, when my dad kind of turned to us and said, like, I'm going to work, and I don't know if I'll be back tonight. I'll be back tomorrow. None of that felt right. None of that felt normal. And I don't know, I've never really had a conversation to see if any of my sister and my mom actually felt the same as I did, but
yeah,
I felt like I recognized that he wasn't coming home. And it's something, it's something that really sat with me for a long time. And I think a lot of the guilt that kind of came out of that situation at 6 years old really came from that moment or that feeling. And I had no idea how to talk about that. That's such a deep and intrinsic feeling that at 6 years old, one, you don't have logic, right? You're
Yeah.
just on the verge of kind of learning how to develop logic, and your brain physically is developing logic. So you don't have that. And so emotionally attaching things like that feeling to guilt is quite common, right? And so, you know, when you go through a really traumatic event, because grief is traumatic, trauma is a relative term. So it's, you know, when you look at whatever you've gone through, if it's something that overwhelmed you, it's traumatic, right? It's not, you're not just getting punched in the face and that's trauma. That's physical trauma, but there's emotional trauma, there's psychological trauma, there's spiritual trauma. And so that's,
I'm so glad you say that. It's so important to bring that up, really. Like, yeah. And just very quickly, I don't want to interrupt you too long here, but just very quickly, I think that whole, when you said when you were 6 years old, logic is something that hasn't really quite developed yet. But I think that kids, especially that age, have got such strong intuition, and they might not know what to do with it yet, or how to make sense of it, or how to use it. But I believe intuition is super strong with kids. We almost unlearn it as adults and then have to relearn it again, or can if we want to. But yeah, back to you. I didn't want to.
Yeah, because it's a good point to bring up, because intuition and logic are two very separate things. They come from different parts of the brain.
Yeah.
And so, like, when you start to look back at your life, how I did, you start to learn to dissect what those meant, right? What did my intuition tell me in this situation? Well, it told me something was wrong. This person may never come back, and so you didn't stop him. That's what it told me then. What it tells me now is that I recognized a bad situation before it happened, because there were signals and there were markers that were showing me that something was going on. But at the same time, the logic right now tells me I had no clue, right? I was 6 years old, and I was relatively powerless and helpless in this situation to stop anything.
Yeah.
But that's not how it felt at 6 years old, right? I didn't have all that, you know, decompression and perspective to step back and look at my situation and say, you know, Dylan, this wasn't your fault.
Yeah.
What I did at 6 years old was, Dylan, this was your fault. This was all you knew it was going to happen.
You felt it, you didn't act. Yeah. And
you didn't do anything, right? Even though I did. Like, I very much, I remember grabbing his leg and telling him not to leave, which it essentially is doing something, but it wasn't enough, right? It wasn't enough for him, clearly. And so he followed through with it, you know, later that day. But the important thing is, like, I didn't get from 6 years old to where I am now by just learning how to tell that story. You know, there's, you know, I like to think of, like, the healing process is a deeply interactional process, right? And what I mean by that is, it's not just looking at this wound and saying, okay, we need to heal this wound. It's, how do I interact with myself? How do I interact with the world around me? How does the world around me interact with me? And how can I reperceive, renegotiate those interactions before you can really even address what it means to heal the wound? Because if you can't have a conversation, you're not going to heal anything. Yeah. Right. And so, like, I very much think, like, the work that I do as a mental health coach is so important for those people who I work with, because the first thing that we do is we build a relationship, right? It's, here's my boundaries, here's your boundaries. I respect them, you respect mine, and we have a conversation. And that stability is the development of that initial portion of the healing process. Because if you can't get past interactional healing, you're not going to get to the actual bodily trauma that happened to you. Yeah. And that's really what I found, is that when I was 25 and I was going through this, you know, this process of wanting to kill myself, I actually recognized I didn't interact with people. I wouldn't allow myself to interact with people. I didn't talk about my dad's suicide. I certainly didn't talk about how I wanted to kill myself for 20 years. And that led me to a point where the interactions, I saw them very clearly. I would ask for help, but not with words. I would ask with my emotions. I would ask with my actions. I would, you know, do things that would kind of bring attention to me. And I don't like the idea of saying attention seeking, but it's for lack of a better term, that's what it is.
Asking. Yeah.
Right. I'm asking.
If I may, I want to throw something in there, and it just got triggered because Terry just went on. Terry's one of our moderators, and everybody else. I just wanted to say hi. Thank you for joining. I had this most beautiful conversation with Terry, who's just watching now, and a couple of other ladies at my very first retreat that I ran. And we brought up that topic. One of the ladies brought this topic of neediness. You know, how neediness is, got another thumbs up. Thanks, Rob. Neediness is that such a negative term, but it's only negative by the meaning we put to it, you know. But when you see it from a neutral space, you know, it's just our needs, what we need. And then society brings up the term neediness and makes it into something negative, which it's not, you know. And this is, I think, where society has got it quite wrong, that it instantly gets labeled. So many things get labeled for the lack of better words. They try to put things into labels like, you know, being a widow. Widow is instantly a negative label. I don't feel that my life is negative whatsoever. I've really turned it into something amazing and positive. And it was due to my choices and due to my shifts in perspective, due to my healing, due to everything I do and everything who I am, and also everything that Rob and I were together. So when you talk about this, you know, asking for attention, I really like that term, that asking for attention. Yet it is so tricky for you when you are in the emotion to actually put the right words to it. And I'd like to throw that back to you, Dylan, and ask what your experience is with that. But I often experience that when people are in trauma or in deep emotion or are going through grief and don't know how to actually get through that on their own, asking for help so often brings up that fear of rejection. What if somebody says no and then I'm still alone? Or even worse, what if somebody says yes and then I get attached to the person? I could lose that person again. There's so often fear involved to actually open ourselves up to help. And I'd really love to hear what your experience was with that, because that's where exactly we started a conversation, you know, that asking for help through behavior rather than words. What was your experience with that?
Well, it's, you know, I go back to the idea, right? It's an interactional process. Yeah. And to heal for me required me to really look at that, right? What was I afraid of? I didn't talk to people because, for one, I didn't think people would understand, right? And I think that's the biggest lie I've ever told myself, is that no one has the capacity to empathize with me, right? Because of the diversity and the complexity of my situation, having gone through, you know, a parental suicide, and then also having gone through domestic violence after that, bullying after that, war, right? It was just every single time I was stacking on something new that said, no one is going to have these, you know, this situation, and no one will ever understand me. And yet I look at myself now and I recognize it was never about the circumstances. It's always about the emotion, right? Because people come to me that I've never been through their situation. I've never been through sexual violence or sexual assault. And yet people come to me because I'm a remarkable, you know, I build a remarkable relationship for people who have been through that to overcome it and walk through it. But yet I've never been through it. Yeah. And the reason is that the circumstance doesn't matter, right? It's the ability to recognize that the person across from you has the ability to feel the same emotion. Yeah. And so it's not all that difficult to empathize and create compassion within a relationship, regardless of whether you've been through the same thing or not. It doesn't matter. What matters is, can you build a relationship with boundaries? Can you empathize with the person that's speaking? Do you know how to actually word things with respect to the circumstances? Those are the real keys. And I think you touched on something that was really important in, especially in my work, connotation. Something that we really don't have conversations about. What is connotation? Well, it's, what do I determine this to be, right? This word, right? Guilt, right? When I say guilt, I can guarantee most people think that's a negative thing. But the answer is, it's wrong. Like that's a wrong assumption, because what is guilt? Guilt is a word, right? And then it's an emotion. Is it a bad emotion? That depends, right?
Mm-hmm. I
If
love
you're
that you say
guilty
that.
for something,
Yeah.
right? Like if you're guilty for something, if you feel guilt for something that you didn't do, is it really bad or good? Like you
Yeah.
know, now, but
It's,
then
mm,
you ask the opposite question. If you just did something really bad and you actually did that, should you feel guilt? Is that a good emotion to feel? I would say yes. Right. And
mm,
so it's how do you determine the interaction with what you're actually feeling? Right. Do you feel guilt? Do you feel strength? Do you feel courage? Do you feel respect? It's how do I define these words? How do I define these values? And do I add a connotation that's built from society and culture rather than development through my own self-awareness?
yeah.
And these are the things that, you know, if you really want to overcome the things that you've been through, that's where you start. It's how do I interact, right? How do I define, right? And how do I clarify? Because culture will tell you one thing, right?
Mhm.
Your sister or your mother or your father might tell you one thing. This is how you're supposed to feel. And then
Yeah.
you look at that and you say, absolutely fucking not, right?
Mm,
I'm not going to feel that way because that
yeah.
makes no sense to me, right?
Yeah.
And so you renegotiate within yourself and you say, I don't have to feel guilt for my father ending his
Mhm.
life. I had nothing to do with that, right?
Yeah.
I existed and I was in a situation that I could not control and I was helpless to prevent.
Mm,
I made an attempt, and that was more than, you know, more than what I really should have done at that
yeah.
age. And I have to learn that that wasn't my fault. That was a
Mm,
choice by someone else that unfortunately, due to the existence of problems far beyond me,
mm,
I couldn't stop.
yeah.
Right. And to recognize that is to, uh, you know, kind of justify against the very thing that has upheld my entire identity. Right.
Mm,
And so now
incredible.
you're
Yeah.
talking about you're talking about rebuilding an identity off of something else. And how do
Mm,
you do that? Well, and
yeah.
that's kind of where I found myself in 2015 was I've built myself on guilt. I've built
Yeah.
myself on regret.
I want to go back to something that you said that really stood out for me. You know, I didn't want to interrupt your story here, yet I want to go back to that point where you said, you know, how you were supposed to feel. And I think that's where so many things go wrong as well. You know, again, it's always those expectations and labels by society or from society where I'm like, well, who are you to tell me how I'm supposed to feel, you know? And I'm putting that out to everyone, including myself, you know. I'm not ever telling people how they are supposed to feel. What I offer them is a different perspective. What I offer them is how you can work through that. And one thing, and I'd like to again throw that back to you, Dylan, and hear your opinion on that. One
Mhm.
thing that came up a lot during the retreat, I've just had a retreat over the weekend, and there's this, I always say there is this space between the really deep emotion, the hurt, the pain that you're going through. And when you come in from a perspective of a mindset mentor, I used to be a mindset coach, more business related before Rob died. And then I came in with this approach, you know, oh, this is how you shift your perspective, and this is how you go from positive to negative. Super simple, of course, you know, but when you bring that into the space of grief, there needs to be this space in between, that space where I say where you neutralize emotions. You can't go from, hey, this freaking hurts, to, hey, be happy the next day. You know, that doesn't work. There needs to be this space of neutralizing and looking at things as just is, like guilt, like grief. Who says it's negative? Who says it's positive? Who says or who tells you what you're
Yeah.
supposed to feel? You know, there's this field of, let me just be. Let it just, you know, without any judgment, without any expectations, without any labels, let them just be and feel it, and take that whole meaning out that everybody's trying to give it. You know, it's that whole, I feel society works a lot with labels when there's a
Yep.
lack of actual words for something. What's your experience with that? I love that neutral space in between, because I feel there's a lot of healing that happens in there.
We try to take something remarkably complex and simplify it.
Yeah.
Right. And that's just humanity, right? Like we're the biggest hypocrites in the world, right? There's this inherent hypocrisy within humans that say we know what is right and
Mm,
yet we don't, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so I've always looked at that and regarded right and wrong as something that is supremely subjective, right? And so we have really no clarity on whether this actually works or not for you. And
Yeah.
so my idea of all of this, what you're very much talking about, neutrality is remarkable, and not just in grief. It's everywhere, right? When you can do a whole lot with extreme positivity or extreme negativity, but when you sit with neutrality, I think you find a place where you are comfortable with yourself, right? So when you recognize, and I'm not just talking about neutrality of I'm not going to make this decision or this decision. I just think like whether this is right or wrong is not we're not talking political here. What we're talking is, when I look at the word guilt, I don't assume that it's a bad thing. I don't assume that it's a good thing, right? I just know that what guilt is something that needs to be processed. What anger is something that needs to be processed.
Yeah.
There's a lot of righteousness in anger. There's also a lot of terrifying potential in anger as well. And so if you never use anger because you always think it's a bad thing, well, what's going to happen? No one's ever going to think you're an angry person. And so they're probably going to walk all over you. Well, that's not a good thing. Yeah. So there has to be some representation of balance, right? And neutrality gives you the power to actually utilize that, rather than thinking anger is a bad thing, don't use it, right? Or on the opposite end of the spectrum, all I do is get angry. Well, that's never good, because then you lack self-control. And so like there's always this, if you lean to one side, you get that result. That's just natural consequences. Yeah. But if you find a way to capitalize off neutrality and say, I'm not going to use anger unless I actually want to, that's remarkable, because then you have the capacity to say, I'm going to be assertive here. I'm going to be angry here because someone's crossed my boundaries, and I'm going to represent myself in a way that I think is natural. I am naturally upset with you. That's fair. I think that's abundantly fair. And then when you can learn to say, but I don't want to be angry about that anymore. I feel like I've represented myself. I've spoken what I've needed to speak. That ability to express yourself, right? That's really the key. That ability to express yourself, but also maintain control, is, I think, the most healthy behavior humans can go through.
I really love that you say that. I'd love to add a few things here. Like I've changed my perspective around anger quite significantly over the years when I went through my own healing journey and my own learning to understand my anger. I had some unwarranted anger, like really rage, in my 20s and 30s for unresolved childhood trauma that I never looked at till it was triggered, till I wanted to heal it, So that luckily is in the past for me. Yet what shifted for me was that there are a couple of things. I realized that anger is a cover-up emotion. It's always quite important to allow yourself to look at what's underneath. What is it actually covering up? And usually it is things like frustration or sadness or grief or whatever comes up, But for me, I realized that anger is actually something really great and beautiful, because for me, it's that opening the valve, releasing what hurts you, what you've stored up, what you just can't bear to hold anymore. Yet the biggest thing about it all is to learn to express it in a healthy way, because anger, of course, is not so great anymore when it turns into self-harm or harming others, hurting others. That's where I draw the boundary. But anger itself is great when you learn how you can actually release it in a healthy way. Obviously, that's the biggest point for me. Yeah. I would love to ask you, I know we talked about your dad when you were 6 years old. You mentioned that when you were 25, you got to the point where you wanted to take your own life. Do you mind telling us how you came to that point, what built up to that, and most importantly, what prevented you from doing it?
All good questions. And I feel like I have a different answer every time, because I think that moment will always be one of great confusion. the more I think about it, the more I don't know exactly how to put forth what brought me to that point.
Yeah.
I could easily say, right, it started at 6. But at the same time, there were moments in the month leading up to it that kind of led me to lose a whole lot of control, lose a whole lot of emotional control, because I had lost a lot in just that month. You know, I like I said, I lost my dad when I was 6, which ultimately led me to be a part of the household that the next man in my life then abused me. For everything I did wrong, he would hit me with a 3/4 inch leather belt from small of my back all the way down to my calves, to the point where I couldn't sit down at school comfortably. I'd always have to kind of lean left or right on my hips. You know, and so that taught me how to embrace pain in a way that was remarkably uncomfortable. If you really look at it, it was a very unhealthy way to embrace pain. And that led me to the military. And obviously the military led me to Afghanistan in 2012. And I saw a whole lot of things there that left me with a lot of memories that I'll never forget, and not the good ones. And in the aftermath of that deployment, I came home, and 4 days later I tore my ACL. Because I thought, like, when I was coming home from Afghanistan, I was like, I'm going to go special forces because I just feel like this is the best place for me. Because that was basically my call to end my life. I wouldn't do it myself, but I'd put myself in combat as much as possible for the chance to have someone else do it for me. And that ACL tear was a representation of all of my wishes not coming true. Because now I had to, if I wanted to join special forces or, you know, go on another deployment or anything like that, I had to heal. And I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to go die. And that was my goal. And so what happened after that was
before we go too far away from this, can I ask why? Because this is so rare that you get the opportunity to actually ask somebody who has healed as much as you have. What made you think that I didn't want to heal, I wanted to die? Did you actually consciously think I didn't want to heal because it was too hard basket, or you found it impossible, or what was the reason that you thought that?
So the response preceded that question. I wanted to die before I ever joined the military. Right. The second my dad ended his life was basically kind of the inspiration for me not wanting to live anymore. Because I didn't know I could do it. I didn't know I was allowed to do it. I didn't want to allow myself to do it. So every choice I made following my father's suicide was interesting, because the rule that I made for myself was I won't drink alcohol, I won't do tobacco, I won't do drugs, and I won't kill myself. Right. That was my 4th rule. I would not kill myself. But that rule didn't cover, I wouldn't put myself in a situation where I couldn't die. Right. Wow. So I went around my rules. You know, I was a principled human being, but principled didn't stop me from putting myself in situations that nearly broke my principles in indirect ways. So rather than asking me, you know, why didn't I want to heal? Well, like I said, I wanted to die. So healing was never part of the solution. And so, you know, following that, I ended up tearing my other ACL after that reconstruction, almost a year to the date when I tore the other one. So I had a good ACL in my left one, tore my ACL in the right one, and then a year later I tore my ACL again. So this brought me to 2015. I was about done with this. You know, I had just torn it. I had just torn an ACL for the 3rd time. I was struggling to kind of maintain my military career at this time. Like, people were getting frustrated with me, just constantly getting calls of, why isn't this guy going to this school or this school? Well, he can't because he tore his ACL. You know, I was trying to give value where I could, but it just felt like I wasn't performing to the level that I wanted to. Physically, my body wasn't doing what I wish it could do. Like my mind could do it, but my body physically was stopping me. And so it was just like all of this was compounding. And then on top of that, my ex-girlfriend and I had ended our relationship a couple of weeks before this moment. So just so many things were kind of culminating to a point where one day I just went home and I just couldn't do it anymore. And I pulled out a gun. I sat down in the hallway and I didn't think I'd come out of that moment. And what happened to stop me is always something that I just don't know. That's I would say the confusing part is because I don't remember one thing. I remember a lot of things. I remember a lot of people going through my head. But at the same time, I also remember that rule that I set for myself. Don't kill yourself. As simple as that was, as ignorant as I was at 7 years old to make that rule, it's actually quite a lot of wisdom in it regarding my situation. So I just remember getting to the point where, holding a gun behind my ear or below my ear, and pulling that trigger to a point where it should have broke, but it didn't. And I put it down, was a remarkably traumatic is one word, but also enlightening, because it forced me to ask myself the question from a very, very much a third person kind of perspective.
Yeah.
How did you end up here? How did you get yourself here? And in response, I had to really own the answer of, there were a lot of people that made choices in your life to get, but ultimately you made decisions yourself to put yourself here, to put yourself in this situation. No one told you to put a gun to your head. You did. And so I very much had to sit with that question for a couple of days before I ever made any, attempts to, have a conversation with anyone. But it was, like I said, it's a remarkably confusing experience, with so many, different, I don't know, just so many different things coming at you all at once.
I just want to say, I find it extremely remarkable that you made this decision and these rules at the age of 7. That's absolutely remarkable. And I also want to say, I am so glad that you didn't go through with it, whatever held you back. I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful that we are having this conversation now, because I truly believe, and I'm having goosebumps just saying that there is hundreds and thousands of people out there who do need to hear your message, and where they can look at you and know that there is hope. I look at you and I know that there is hope because, for somebody who's been through such trauma and accumulated trauma from the age of 6, and to come through on the other side and so calmly talk about something so deep from a space of love, from a space of healing and spreading hope into this world, I'm just absolutely humbled and so grateful that you're here to talk to us about that, Dylan. So thank you so much for that. Can you please share from there on, like from this moment of absolute confusion and enlightenment, and absolute grateful that you did not go through with that, what was your path from there to then starting to talk about it on TikTok and coming to over 500,000 followers? Tell us a little bit. We want to end this on a,
right. Well, I can tell you, I can tell you for sure, it wasn't always as calm as I am now, starting these conversations.
Yeah.
But I remember the first one, I think, really important one. In the 3 days that followed me choosing not to end my life, I had 3 conversations. One with my 2 best friends, and I just kind of told them, this is where I'm at. Very simple, short, to the point. They had no idea. I had a call with my sister the next day. Same thing. But the one that really mattered to me, and the one that, absolutely broke me to have the conversation, was having to tell my mom. Right. Like, even now there's emotions of remembering that conversation, of how important it was to do that.
Yeah.
But how do you tell your mom, the person that lost a husband to suicide, that her child almost did that, a couple days before, and she had no clue. She just assumed everything was fine, because at that point I was such a good actor, right? For 20 years I had hid the fact that I wanted to end my life every day. I had suicidal ideation. If I really look back, I'm like, I did, right? If I wasn't thinking about my dad's suicide, I was thinking about how I could die, right? And it's not just, I think this is one thing that people don't recognize. Just because you're sitting there and not thinking about, wow, I want to put a gun to my head, or I want to take these pills. No, I'm talking about, if you're thinking about the indirect ways to end your life, that is also suicidality. I wish I just didn't have to be here anymore. I wish.
That's exactly that. Thank you for saying that. It's just the fact that you don't want to be here anymore, and you might not even be thinking about, how could I do it, or would I even do it? But just the fact that you don't want to be here anymore. I experienced that at the age of 9, the not wanting to be here anymore, and knowing that I'd never do anything to myself. I never had the thought of actually killing myself, but I did have suicidal thoughts, as in, I wish I wouldn't be here anymore. I remember that so vividly, and it was very intense for quite some time, actually, because of my trauma in my childhood, sexual abuse, etc., that I finally am able to talk openly about it, because I've healed it. But for many, many years, that was my biggest fear, that it could come up in an interview accidentally, or that, I was holding back from public speaking for that reason. I always felt like if that comes up, that would be my biggest, darkest secret. And now I'm like, no, it's actually not. It's healed, it's in the past, and it's all part of my path and who I am, and it helps me help others. And as you said, you recognize these things in others. I know you said that when you talk about the TikTok channel, that you don't have to have been through what other people have been through. When I started Loving Life After Loss, I knew that I'd be confronted with a lot of different types of death that I have not experienced, gratefully not experienced. Yet can I help those people? Yeah, absolutely. Because you do recognize, the tragedy, the hurt, and all the other things that come with it. You do recognize it in other people. It's almost like a secret code. You don't even have to talk about it. When I walk on the street and I see a woman I've never seen before, I can tell you instantly if she's been sexually abused in her childhood or not, without ever talking to her. It's something that it's something that you sense, that you feel. And I think it's the same thing with trauma, So I really appreciate you saying that, because it's not always the act of killing yourself or thinking about how you can kill yourself. The actual fact that you don't want to be around is enough, that you do need somebody to help you through this. I'd really want to encourage everyone listening to this, if you feel like that at all, to talk to somebody you can trust. And if it's nobody in your inner circle that you can talk to, find somebody outside, because sometimes it's easier to talk to somebody who doesn't even know you. I figured that it was so much easier for me to talk to strangers who had no insight, or who were not really truly connected to me or affected by my life in any way. It makes it sometimes easier. Whoever it is, find someone that you can talk to. And I'm so grateful, Dylan, that you did that. And thank you for sharing, that you talk to your two best friends, that you talk to your sister and to your mom. And I also want to add, from a mom's perspective, not just that when you said, well, I told my mom, who's also lost her husband to suicide, she made you. Do you know what I mean? I use that as a fun sort of one-liner with my boys all the time. It's like, I made you, but it's really that fact, that she made you, she created you with so much love. And for her, that is hurtful enough, despite whether her husband killed herself or not. Just the fact that she created you, that would have really been very hard for her to understand without realizing what was going on. So I'm super grateful that you're sharing this here. And I'm sure there are a lot of people watching this who needed to hear this right now. So I really want to thank you. I want to bring you back to your TikTok channel now. What do you actually share on there, and how do you help people? I really want to give you a bit of time here to promote what you do, and really, because I'm saying promotion here because people need what you offer. I really love what you offer. So please share a little bit about that, what you do on TikTok and how you can help people.
Yeah. Well, I share whatever I feel is important, right? I've been through my process of healing and coming to a point where, I want to kind of go back to what you said, of the idea of talking to someone isn't really always the best explanation for it. Right. I look at it and everyone says like, you go to talk therapy. Well, that doesn't really represent what you should be doing. You should be expressing. The idea of expression, right? I talked to my friends and I talked to my sister. I expressed to my mom. I felt, right? I had a processing moment of recognizing this is guilt I should feel, right? This is healthy guilt of, I put myself in a position where I almost ended my life. And this person is looking at me with, I wish you had never put yourself there, right? Because you had me to talk to and to express yourself with. And so, you start to learn how to actually express when you talk to someone that can actually build you a relationship with healthy boundaries, and hold you to that. So I try and help people do that. I try and show people consistency. I try to show people this is what trauma is. All the things that I've talked about here, this is what I talk about on TikTok, and my podcast and everywhere else that I am. I try and give people a representation of what I think this is how you build a healthy life. And I very much go against what the traditional kind of cultural representation of right, like of what things are. Like I go against the connotations of so many different words. I talk about values far more differently than most people talk about them. I have conversations about trauma. I talk about suicide, right? I talk about the things that, 20 years ago, if you thought they were taboo on social media, that's what I talk about. Because they're important to have conversations about. I talk about grief, everything that I've talked with Marie about here and on my podcast when she was on, I've probably talked about it on TikTok, and I kind of try and make that a representation of my content.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I cannot thank you enough. Like, this is one of my absolute favorite conversations, and I totally understand I shouldn't pick favorites, but I love, and I'm openly doing it here, I love that we had such an open conversation about things that are so taboo. And I really cannot stress enough about how important it is to have these conversations. Like, in particular, like mental health has been such a huge topic everywhere. Even on LinkedIn, there's such a rise of the topic mental health, which I really love. I've written about how LinkedIn goes more and more personal now, and I really love that. I think we need to be humans a lot more. And before I let you go, I actually want to read out a couple of comments that we had, because I had something that Terry wanted to say to you. So, Dylan, such wisdom I can use. Being naturally upset with someone, I need to learn how to express in a healthy way. Absolutely, Terry. Sending lots of love as well. Honored and humbled to hear you speak from the depth of your heart and soul. Thank you so much for saying that, Terry. I just really want to thank you for being here, Dylan. I really want you to share all the links where people can follow you on your podcast and on your there's one more. After I read that out, she said something else. My favorite by far. Absolutely. Thank you, Dylan. We're not supposed to pick favorites, but we both did. So I really love it. We will be sharing your YouTube channel, your TikTok, your podcast, whatever you have. I got another thumbs up from Rob. Thank you. And I'd really love to keep sharing this. Maybe you want to come back at a later stage, and I'd really love to have you again and keep sharing what you do. I love that we are connected. And before I let you go, is there any final words that you want to share?
Just never quit on yourself. That's it. I appreciate it, Marie.
Thank you so much for being here, Dylan. I'm going to say farewell to everybody. This is Marie and Dylan signing off. Bye for now. Thank you.